A warm welcome, and thank you for joining the Winning Paths podcast family. We'd like to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude for your support and enthusiasm. Your subscription means the world to us, and we're thrilled to have you on this archery journey. At Winning Paths, part of TIFAM, the Irish Field Archery Monthly, we're not just an audio channel, we're a community of passionate archery enthusiasts, united by our love for this ancient and captivating sport. Whether you're a seasoned archer or just starting out, our podcast is here for you. Dive into archery's rich history with our insightful monologues, exploring fascinating moments from ancient archers to modern-day legends, lore, and myths. Our interviews feature key figures in the archery world, sharing their experiences, insights, and advice. Our hosts also aren't afraid to voice bold and sometimes thought-provoking opinions, sparking lively discussions within our community. If you're enjoying the Winning Paths podcast, be sure to subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, share it with fellow archery enthusiasts, and together we can create a vibrant hub for everything archery, a place where passion meets knowledge and every arrow finds its mark. Thank you once again for being a part of the Winning Paths family. Your support fuels our passion, and we're excited to keep bringing you engaging content that resonates with the archery community. Subscribe on Spotify, follow us on YouTube, and let's continue shooting for the stars together. The stone does not move unless the wind whispers to it first. In this particular case, the wind that set things into motion was pungent, biting, and unexpected. The wind reeked of garlic. It carried the scent of mugwort, the quiet bitterness of divine meddling, and a peculiar bear's stubborn endurance. Dangun Wanggeom, the legendary founder of Korea's first kingdom, Gojoseon, owes his very existence to a strangely underwhelming trial of garlic and a bear's surprisingly low standards. His origin story, though revered in Korean myth, is less a tale of grand destiny and more a cosmic joke, one of those jokes that start out small, grow bigger than anyone expected, and somehow shape the fate of an entire civilization. Let's begin, not at the birth of Dangun himself, but with his celestial father, Hwanung, who was itching to make a mess of things on earth. Hwanung, the son of Hwanin, the celestial emperor, was a divine figure with far too much time on his hands. He had looked down at Earth from his heavenly perch, and like a bored rich kid staring at his model train set, decided that things needed improvement. Humans, in all their messy, fire-making, goat-herding glory, were in desperate need of some divine order, and Hwanung, growing restless with heavenly life, was determined to be the one to set things right. It was, of course, a classic case of overconfidence. What Hwanung lacked in actual leadership experience, he more than made up for in enthusiasm, and a divine entourage of 3,000 celestial beings, who, one imagines, were about as useful as a team of consultants at a startup. Hwanung pleaded with his father to let him go down to earth and take matters into his own hands, and after some deliberation, likely spurred on by Hwanin's desire for some peace and quiet, the elder god agreed. Hwanung was granted permission to descend to earth, to Baekdu Mountain, where he set up shop and named his new headquarters Shinshi, the City of God. A bit grandiose, perhaps, but if you're a celestial being, subtlety isn't exactly your strong suit. Now Hwanung didn't just swoop down to Earth and start bossing mortals around like some celestial CEO. No, he had bigger plans. His goal was to improve humanity, to introduce laws, agriculture, and other useful things, like an ordered society that wouldn't collapse into chaos every time someone disagreed about the proper way to herd cattle. And for a while, things were going according to plan. But this being a myth, things never stay orderly for long. Enter the tiger and the bear, two creatures who must have been nursing some deep existential dissatisfaction. Perhaps it was the endless hunting and foraging, the constant threat of being eaten or being too slow to catch dinner. Maybe they had watched humans from afar, with their fire pits and their rudimentary homes, and decided they wanted a piece of the action. Whatever their reasoning, the tiger and the bear approached Hwanung with a bold request. They wanted to be human. This is where the story takes a sharp turn into the absurd. You'd think a god would respond to such a request with a lesson about the natural order, or maybe a bit of divine insight about the dangers of wishing to be something you're not. But Hwanung, possibly as a way to amuse himself, gave them a challenge instead. If you can live in a cave for 100 days, surviving only on garlic and mugwort, I'll grant your wish and make you human. garlic and mugwort. Not exactly the kind of diet you'd expect from a divine trial, and certainly not the sort of thing you'd see on a trendy health blog. But there it was, laid out before the tiger and the bear. This challenge was not about strength, bravery, or even intelligence. No, this was a test of sheer willpower, of stubbornness in the face of an utterly ridiculous set of circumstances. Survive on garlic and mugwort, two plants not known for their pleasant flavor or digestibility, and you can become human. The tiger, who had presumably spent its entire life as the top predator in the food chain, lasted all of 3 days before it bailed. And who can blame it? Garlic and mugwort are hardly the feast of champions. The tiger, with its pride and carnivorous inclinations, decided that humanity wasn't worth the hassle. It probably thought something along the lines of, "If being human means eating garlic for 100 days, I'll stick to being a tiger, thank you very much." But the bear? The bear was made of sterner stuff. Whether out of sheer stubbornness or an impressive ability to tolerate pungent food, the bear stayed in the cave, gnawing on garlic and mugwort for 100 long, stinky days. When the bear finally emerged, she was no longer a bear. She had been transformed into a woman, a real flesh-and-blood human woman. And so, with her trial complete, Hwanung kept his promise. The bear had earned her place among humans. Here's where things get even stranger. Hwanung, ever the pragmatic god, decided that since he had turned the bear into a human, he might as well marry her. And just like that, the former bear became his wife, without so much as a romantic gesture or a pause to reflect on the oddity of the situation. One wonders what their courtship must have been like. Did she still have a taste for honey and raw fish? Did she get nostalgic for hibernation? Did she ever think, even for a moment, that maybe being a bear wasn't so bad after all? Nevertheless, from this strange union of god and bear woman, Dangun Wanggeom was born. It's hard to imagine what it must have been like growing up as the son of a celestial being and a former bear. Dangun, no doubt, had an unusual childhood, full of whispered stories about his mother's ursine past and his father's divine meddling. But from an early age, it was clear that Dangun wasn't just any child. He had inherited his father's celestial gifts and his mother's stubborn endurance, and it wasn't long before his skills as an archer became legendary. Dangun was no ordinary archer. His arrows could split the wind, they said, and he could hit a target so far away that mere mortals couldn't even see it. His talent with a bow was nothing short of supernatural, and his reputation as a divine marksman spread far and wide. But as impressive as his archery skills were, Dangun had a much greater destiny ahead of him. His father, Hwanung, had a plan. Dangun was to become the founder of a new kingdom, the first kingdom of Korea, Gojoseon. The task of founding a kingdom isn't exactly something a young man dreams of. Most would be content to spend their days perfecting their aim, perhaps entering archery contests or living a quiet life in the mountains. But Dangun wasn't given a choice. His father had decided that Dangun was the one to unite the scattered tribes of the Korean peninsula, to bring them together under one banner and one king. So, Dangun set out, armed with his bow and arrows, and the kind of divine confidence that comes from being the son of a god. He travelled the land, gathering followers, convincing local chieftains to join his cause, and slowly but surely he began to build his kingdom. But it wasn't as easy as just showing up and declaring himself king. The tribes of the land had their own leaders, their own squabbles, and their own ambitions. Dangun had to prove himself, not just as a warrior, but as a ruler. Fortunately, Dangun's archery skills gave him a distinct advantage. In one legend, he is said to have ended a dispute between two rival chieftains by shooting an arrow through the heart of a tree from a distance so great that neither chieftain could believe their eyes. His feats of archery became the stuff of legend, and soon the people of the land began to see him not just as a skilled warrior, but as a leader chosen by the gods. As the years passed, Dangun's kingdom grew, and Gojoseon became a powerful and prosperous nation. He established laws, built cities, and promoted agriculture, all while maintaining peace and order throughout the land. His reign was marked by wisdom and justice, and the people flourished under his rule. But for all his success, there was a part of Dangun that remained restless, a part of him that could never quite shake the feeling that his life was one long divine joke. Dangun had been born of a bear, raised by a god, and given a kingdom to rule, but he had never asked for any of it. He had never chosen this path for himself. It had been thrust upon him, like so many other aspects of his life, by the whims of the gods. And as time went on, Dangun began to question the very nature of his existence. Was he truly meant to be a king, or was he simply a pawn in some celestial game, a tool used by the gods to further their own inscrutable purposes? These doubts weighed heavily on Dangun's mind, and as the years passed he grew more and more disillusioned with his role as king. He had done everything that had been asked of him. He had united the tribes, founded a kingdom, and ruled with wisdom and justice. But what had it all been for? Was there any meaning to it beyond the amusement of the gods? In the end, Dangun made a decision that would shock his people and echo through history. He abdicated the throne. He handed over the kingdom to one of his descendants and retreated to the mountains, far from the responsibilities and pressures of kingship. It was a decision born not of weakness or defeat, but of a deep understanding that his true destiny lay elsewhere. Dangun became a hermit, living in quiet solitude in the mountains, where he could finally escape the noise and chaos of the mortal world. He spent his remaining days in contemplation, reflecting on the strange and absurd twists of fate that had brought him to where he was. Perhaps he found peace in the stillness of the mountains, or perhaps he continued to wrestle with the same doubts and questions that had plagued him throughout his life. One thing is certain: Dangun Wanggeom's legacy did not end with his abdication. His kingdom, Gojoseon, would endure for centuries, becoming the foundation upon which the Korean people would build their civilization. His legend would grow, and he would be remembered not just as a great king, but as a divine archer, a wise ruler, and the founder of Korea. But behind the myth, behind the grand stories of archery and kingship, there is always the lingering scent of garlic, a reminder that even the greatest legends are born of the strangest circumstances. Dangun's story, for all its grandeur, is rooted in absurdity, in the whims of the gods, and in a bear's stubborn determination to become human. And perhaps that is what makes his story so enduring, because at its heart it is a story not just of power and destiny, but of the small absurd moments that shape us all. Dangun Wanggeom, the founder of Gojoseon, the divine archer, was ultimately a man caught in the strange dance between the heavens and the earth, between the ridiculous and the sublime. And in the end, it was not his kingdom or his archery that defined him, but his understanding that life, whether mortal or divine, is always a bit of a cosmic joke, one that you can't help but laugh at, even if you're the punchline. Well then, since we've waded through the grandiosity of divine archers and bears with a taste for garlic, let's keep the absurdity rolling. To satisfy tradition, or perhaps to challenge it, let's whisk ourselves away from the far-off mountains of Korea to the soggy, windswept shores of the Emerald Isle. After all, if legends are built on the whims of the gods and the stubbornness of beasts, why shouldn't our next tale feature two hapless souls whose greatest aspiration is to catch a mythical stag with a bow that should have been retired centuries ago? If Dangun's life was a cosmic joke he was wise enough to appreciate, Seamus and Paddy O'Donnell are about to stumble into the punchline, utterly oblivious but no less earnest for it. Sure, and if wishes were horses, beggars would ride, Seamus muttered under his breath, his voice as dry and cracked as the peat bogs of Donegal during an unseasonably warm summer. The early morning mist clung to the rolling hills like a shroud, casting an ethereal glow over the rugged landscape. He and his hapless companion, Paddy O'Donnell, shambled forth from their tumble-down hovel, two forlorn figures etched against the bleak canvas of a Glencombe dawn. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the distant, mournful cries of seabirds echoing along the cliffs. Seamus, a wiry wisp of a man whose perpetually furrowed brow seemed to bear the weight of 1,000 unspoken worries, fancied himself a strategist, a mastermind of sorts behind their endless series of harebrained schemes. His eyes, sharp and restless, darted across the landscape as if searching for some hidden opportunity. Paddy, on the other hand, was a lumbering oaf with a heart as soft and yielding as a well-boiled potato. His broad shoulders and towering frame suggested a strength that was, more often than not, undermined by his gentle nature, and a tendency towards clumsiness that rendered his brawn as useful as a chocolate teapot in the face of their habitual ill fortune. On this particular morn, the damp chill of the air seemed to seep into their very bones, but it was the whispered rumours of their quarry that spurred them onward. Tales had spread through the village of a stag of mythical proportions, a creature said to roam the desolate slopes of Slive League. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, a beast with antlers wider than a Galway hooker, and a hide as dark and rich as a pint of porter left too long in the sun. Such a prize, should they succeed in capturing it, promised not only to fill their empty bellies, but also to elevate them from their current station, a siren song to men who had known little but hardship and misfortune. Armed with Seamus's battered bow, a relic from a bygone era when men were men and arrows actually hit their intended targets, and a quiver of Paddy's hastily fletched arrows, they set off into the swirling mist. Their footsteps were muffled by the damp earth, each step accompanied by the squelching sound of boots sinking into the soggy ground. The landscape around them was a patchwork of heather and gorse, the purple and yellow blooms adding a rare splash of colour to the otherwise muted palette of the moor. Unbeknownst to them, they were not alone in their endeavour. From the labyrinthine depths of his set, a cunning badger named Boris observed their clumsy progress with a glint of wry amusement in his beady eyes. Boris was no ordinary badger. His intelligence far surpassed that of his woodland peers, and he took a certain pleasure in watching the misadventures of the two hapless humans who so often provided him with entertainment. His set was a marvel of engineering, with tunnels and chambers that would have made any architect proud, and from his concealed vantage points he had an unparalleled view of the glen. "Would you look at that now?" Boris mused to himself, his voice a low rumble that reverberated through the tunnels of his den. Two Egypts off on another wild goose chase. Sure, and they couldn't hit a barn door with a banjo, let alone a stag of legend. Seamus, ever the optimist despite a lifetime of evidence to the contrary, was the first to spot their elusive quarry. "There he is, Paddy," he hissed, his voice a raspy whisper that cut through the mist like a rusty blade. His hand shot out to grip Paddy's arm, his fingers digging into the coarse fabric of his companion's coat. "Grand as a high king, so he is." Paddy squinted through the swirling fog, his eyes straining to make out the form of the beast, and then he saw it, a magnificent stag standing majestically atop a rocky outcrop, its antlers reaching skyward like the twisted branches of an ancient oak. The stag's coat glistened with moisture, each muscle defined beneath the sleek dark fur. It was a sight to stir the soul, a reminder of the untamed beauty that still clung to their rugged land despite the encroaching hardships of their lives. As Paddy gazed upon the creature, a strange sensation washed over him, a mix of awe and trepidation. "Seamus," he whispered, "are you sure about this? It doesn't seem right somehow, going after a creature like that." Seamus shot him a sharp look, his eyes flashing with impatience. "Don't be getting all sentimental on me now, Paddy. Think of what that stag could mean for us. We'd be the talk of the village, heroes even. Now get your bow ready." Paddy reluctantly reached for his bow, his large hands fumbling as he nocked an arrow. He drew back the string, the wood creaking in protest. His aim was true, or so he fervently believed. The arrow soared through the air, carrying with it the weight of their hopes and dreams, but it missed the stag by a margin so wide it would have embarrassed a blindfolded leprechaun, burying itself with a dull thud into the peaty earth several yards away. "Och, for the love of St. Patrick!" Seamus exclaimed, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "You couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a shovel, Paddy." Paddy hung his head, his cheeks flushing with shame. "I'm sorry, Seamus. I don't know what happened. It was like I couldn't bring myself to harm it." Boris, watching from his concealed vantage point, suppressed a chuckle. He'd witnessed this tragicomic ballet countless times before. Seamus and Paddy were the unwitting jesters of the glen, their misadventures providing endless amusement for the local fauna. But there was something different about today, a subtle shift in the air that piqued his curiosity. Undeterred, or perhaps simply too stubborn to admit defeat, Seamus snatched the bow from Paddy's hands. "If you want something done right, you've got to do it yourself," he muttered. He nocked an arrow, his hands shaking slightly with frustration and cold. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself and took aim at a distant shadow that he hoped was the stag. As he released the arrow, a sudden gust of wind caught it, sending it veering off course. Instead of flying true, the arrow arced wildly and disappeared into the mist. A moment later, a startled cry echoed through the glen, followed by a string of colourful expletives that were decidedly unstag-like. Seamus and Paddy exchanged bewildered glances. "What in the blazes was that?" Paddy whispered, his eyes wide. Before they could react, a figure emerged from the mist, a tall, imposing man clad in dark leathers, an ornate bow slung over his shoulder. His face was stern, chiseled features framed by a mane of dark hair streaked with silver. An arrow protruded from his hat, the feathered end quivering slightly. "Which one of you gobshites thought it wise to take a shot at me?" the stranger demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Seamus's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, words failing him. Paddy, ever the peacekeeper, stepped forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Terribly sorry, sir. We were aiming for a stag, you see. Must have been the wind that carried the arrow astray." The man's piercing gaze shifted between them. "A likely story," he scoffed. "You're lucky it was only me and not someone less forgiving." Seamus found his voice at last. "And who might you be, wandering these parts and taking offence at honest hunters?" The stranger smirked. "Name's Finn O'Rourke, and if you had any sense you'd know better than to poach on lands that aren't yours." "Poach?" Seamus bristled. "We've as much right to hunt here as any man." Finn's eyes narrowed. "These lands belong to the McGrath clan, and they don't take kindly to trespassers. I'd suggest you both turn around and forget about any stags or hares you might be chasing." Paddy tugged at Seamus's sleeve. "Perhaps we should heed his warning, Seamus. No sense in stirring up trouble." But Seamus's pride was wounded, and he wasn't about to back down. "We won't be told where we can and can't go by the likes of you." Finn raised an eyebrow, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Is that so? Perhaps a little lesson in humility is in order." Before Seamus could retort, Finn unslung his bow with lightning speed, an arrow materializing between his fingers as if by magic. He drew back the string, the wood humming with tension, and released. The arrow flew past Seamus's ear, close enough that he could feel the whisper of its passing, and embedded itself in a tree behind him. Seamus paled, his bravado evaporating. Now, no need for that," he stammered. "We'll just be on our way." Finn nodded curtly. "A wise choice." As the two men retreated, their steps hurried and unsteady, Boris watched the scene unfold with keen interest. This unexpected twist had added a new layer of intrigue to his morning's entertainment, but the surprises were not yet over. As Seamus and Paddy made their way back down the slope, they heard a sound that stopped them in their tracks, the soft twang of a bowstring, followed by the sharp whistle of an arrow in flight. They turned to see Finn, but he was no longer alone. Beside him stood a woman, her fiery red hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of flame. She held a bow of her own, its craftsmanship exquisite, the wood inlaid with silver filigree. "Who is that?" Paddy whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Before Seamus could respond, the woman released her arrow. It soared through the air with deadly grace, striking a target they hadn't noticed before, a small woven emblem hanging from a distant branch. The emblem shattered, pieces scattering in the wind. "Well done, Siobhan," Finn said, a note of admiration in his voice. She smiled slyly. "You didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you?" Seamus and Paddy exchanged glances. This was no ordinary pair of hunters. There was something almost otherworldly about them, a grace and precision that spoke of skills honed beyond the ken of ordinary folk. As they stood pondering, the stag reappeared, stepping out from behind a copse of trees. It regarded Finn and Siobhan with a calm that belied the chaos of moments before. Siobhan approached the stag, reaching out a hand to stroke its muzzle. "Thank you for playing your part," she whispered to the creature. The stag nodded, an almost imperceptible movement, before turning and disappearing once more into the mist. Seamus blinked in disbelief. "Did you see that, Paddy? She talked to it like it understood her." Paddy nodded slowly. "I think there's more to this than meets the eye, Seamus." Boris, sensing the gravity of the moment, decided to reveal himself. He emerged from the underbrush, his striped face thoughtful. "Perhaps it's time you two knew the truth," he said, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years. Seamus staggered back. "A talking badger. I must have taken a knock to the head." Boris chuckled. "No, Seamus, your faculties are intact. The glen is a place of old magic, and you've stumbled into a tale much larger than yourselves." Finn and Siobhan approached them, their expressions softened. "The stag is a guardian of these lands," Siobhan explained. "We protect him, and in turn, he protects the balance of nature here." Seamus shook his head, trying to process the information. "But why reveal this to us?" Finn looked at them thoughtfully. "Because your hearts are not without merit. Despite your clumsiness, there's a spark of goodness in you both. Perhaps you'd consider joining us, learning the ways of the rangers who safeguard these lands." Paddy's eyes lit up. "You mean we could be like you?" Boris nodded. "It's not an easy path, but it's a worthy one." Seamus considered the offer, his mind racing. The chance to be part of something greater, to leave behind their life of misfortune. It was a tempting proposition. "What say you, Paddy? Shall we give it a go?" Paddy grinned. "Aye, Seamus, I think it's time we turned over a new leaf." And so, with the mist lifting and the first rays of sunlight piercing through the clouds, Seamus and Paddy began a new chapter in their lives. Under the tutelage of Finn and Siobhan, they learned the art of archery, not the clumsy attempts of their past, but true marksmanship honed through patience and practice. They studied the ways of the forest, the language of the animals, and the ancient lore that bound the glen together. Months passed and the seasons changed. The once hapless poachers became adept rangers, their clumsy footsteps replaced by silent strides, their eyes keen and their hands steady. The villagers spoke of them in hushed tones, tales of their transformation spreading far and wide. One day, as they stood atop the same rocky outcrop where they had first glimpsed the stag, Seamus turned to Paddy with a contented smile. "Who would have thought, eh? From bungling fools to guardians of the glen." Paddy laughed softly. "It's been quite the journey, hasn't it? And to think it all started with a missed arrow and a talking badger." Just then the stag appeared once more, its antlers gleaming in the golden light of the setting sun. It approached them without fear, a silent acknowledgment of their new role. Seamus bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, old friend." The stag inclined its head before turning and disappearing into the forest. As the two men watched it go, Boris appeared beside them. "You've done well," he said. "The glen thrives because of your efforts." Finn and Siobhan joined them, the four standing together as guardians of a land steeped in magic and mystery. But unbeknownst to them, a shadow lurked at the edge of the forest, a figure shrouded in darkness, eyes gleaming with malice. The tranquility of the glen was about to be challenged, and the newfound rangers would soon face a test that would push them to their limits. The hunt was not over, not by a long shot.